evening. Thank you very much for joining us here on Mirror Now. This is Urban Debate and I'm Hina Gambhir. Tonight, viewers, I want to talk about the feeling of helplessness that one experiences while being stranded for hours at the airport. When you pay a huge amount of money for flight tickets, but all you get is disappointment above everything else when your safety is compromised. This morning, hundreds of passengers were left stranded, waiting endlessly, some at the airport, some inside the aircraft for hours because Spicejet could not fly their planes. The company was hit by a ransomware attack last night. As a result, some flights were cancelled and others were delayed for takeoff. Passengers took to social media to narrate their harrowing experience. Passengers said the waiting time ranged from 6 to 8 hours with no information whatsoever. The staff was clueless, airline refused compensation, and no one was taking responsibility. Some even asked that who would be responsible for passenger safety should something untoward happen. Remember how we've been reporting and talking about various incidents of passenger safety being compromised by airlines time and again. Be it the close shave for Indigo passengers where the collision was averted mid-air, or the flights taking off without ATC nod, or the flight hitting an electric pole in the national capital. The big question we are asking tonight is, don't we as passengers who are paying so much of money to these airlines for buying tickets deserve something better? And tonight, I also want to focus on this issue of ransomware attack. Now, as per a recent report, there has been 13% increase in ransomware breaches globally and in India. It says widespread digitization is increasing cyber attacks, and delay in the implementation of technical infrastructure as safeguards can make your system vulnerable. What happened with Spicejet this morning, of course, was not something that Spicejet had done. Eventually, passengers had to suffer. So we are not blaming the airline for the ransomware attack attempt that happened. But what happened after that? That's our focus. And apart from that, we'll try and understand on Urban Debate tonight, what is a ransomware attack? What's behind the rise in these cases, not just in India, but across the world? And can something be done to prevent it? Joining us on the broadcast this evening are my guests. We have Dr. Karnika Seth, who is a cyber law expert, Shri Parthasarthi, partner at Cyber Risk and Managed Services, joining us on the broadcast. Sandeep Sen Gupta, who is an ethical hacker, live with us. Jitendra Bhargav, former ED Air India, also with us on the broadcast. And Sanat Kaul, former Civil Aviation Joint Secretary, Government of India, will be joining us as well on Urban Debate this evening. Good evening to all of you. Thank you for joining us here on Urban Debate on Mirror Now. Mr. Jitendra Bhargav, what is your understanding? What happened with Spicejet's systems this morning?
You know, what happened was, when you look at it, as you very rightly said, it was beyond Spicejet's control. It was unavoidable in a way. But when you look at the consequences of it, I would basically hold brief for the airline when one says that, look, how many passengers were inconvenienced, and sympathize with the passengers. But let's look at the way airline function. When you have a cascading effect of delays at the airport, the number of passengers at the airport swell. Whereas the staff on duty remains the same, or they can be marshaled from the other shift and say, please come and report 2 hours, 3 hours, 4 hours earlier than your scheduled time. But you still cannot manage. We have been through umpteen years for several kinds of things because there are constraints of getting everybody at the airport. One, the entry passes, so you can't get your office people from the city offices into the airport. You need trained staff to manage passengers. So these are kind of rare occasions when something is beyond an airline, but you've got to be appreciative of the fact. But one thing that I would say is, as long as the staff puts in the best effort, they are not seen wanting by the passengers, please condone their role, their performance on that particular day, because it's only logical. Please put yourself in their position, the staff. Instead of handling 100 passengers at a particular hour, you're handling 500 passengers. How are you going to be meeting the requirement? A staff goes and asks the airport staff, for example, and says, when is my flight departure scheduled? They can only give them information as long as they have the information and as long as the airline has been satisfied that yes, they're in a position to fly.
Yes.
And then there are the technicalities of flight duty time limitations of pilots, safety factors have to be kept in view. So while fully sympathizing with the passengers who have undergone these kind of trauma at the airport, inconvenience at the airport, but there is the other side to it also. And let's not forget, ransomware attack was not something that Spicejet invited.
Well, absolutely. Those are very legitimate reasons you have given to us. Of course, we'll be discussing those as well in just a bit. But let's also try and understand the broader question here of ransomware attacks. Dr. Karnika Seth, can something like this be prevented? Firstly, for the benefit of our viewers, could you just help us understand what exactly is it and what makes any company or any company's IT system specifically vulnerable?
That's in fact a very pertinent question, because the ransomware attacks have been escalating in the last years, particularly. Almost 1 in 4 organizations in India, they have been a target of ransomware attacks. And what it essentially does is it introduces a malware attack, into a company system, and the IT system gets the devices get locked, and the files, they get encrypted so that the user is not able to access the record anymore. And bitcoins or cryptocurrencies are usually asked as an extortion racket, to decrypt the files, and that's what a ransomware attack really does. The inability of any organization, whether they are power grids or they're, in the past there have been organizations, even government undertakings or private enterprises who have been attacked with this. They have paid as much as $1 million USD, $2 million USD to, get back their data, which they're unable to retrieve in any case to a full totality. So that's something that is quite rampant. The organizations are revamping their IT infrastructures with security parameters and reasonable security practices, including software patching of OS and other issues like having trainings given, advising their employees or their partners to ensure that whatever links they may get on social media or otherwise, they should not be clicking those, or even on their websites, enhancing the vulnerability testing and monitoring of their infrastructure and audit systems. That is something which is being done increasingly. And these are certain ways in which you can, be safe, basically, and have backups, regular backups of data, because that is the only thing which can safeguard, apart from these measures, the resilience, getting the resilience back into an enterprise to get back on its feet and, serve its customers. So this is something which is classic, in terms of ransomware attacks in India or even globally, I would say. So it's not something new. Both private and public enterprises have had these setbacks, in the last 1 year. In fact, it has risen to 218%, as per, certain cybersecurity firms and surveys which have been conducted. So it's something that is inevitable. In the cyberspace, there's nothing 100% foolproof. You may have n number of security parameters put in, 16 checkpoints, but this is something which is always there, whether it's WannaCry or it's, other RYK or, Perga or other kind of ransomware attacks. There are far too many.
Okay, there are far too many. Of course, I have a list of those attacks and how they have disrupted operations of many companies and impacting people with me right now. And Shri Parthasarathi, I would like you to address this particular issue, how it has been continuously happening, and how was what happened with Spicejet today different from what happened with Air India a few years ago? Can we compare both, or do you think what happened with Mumbai's power grid in October 2020 was something similar to what Spicejet had to go through this morning?
Thank you for having me here. And let me add a different dimension to the entire problem. I think we are entering into very turbulent times in terms of where we're talking about digital. When you look at IT and operational technologies, all of them coming online, right? So today, essentially, when you look at the Spicejet issue, where essentially what happened is essentially the IT systems were not available, and because the IT systems were not available, passengers were stranded. But just take an example, if essentially the same kind of a ransomware attack were actually done on the aircraft control system of Spicejet, and essentially the aircraft had actually been taken in control, then essentially it was equivalent to a hijack. So ransomware, when you talk about it from a IT systems perspective, essentially is a hijack of the IT systems and asking for ransom. Until you basically pay for that, the person does not basically release your particular system. And these, when you start seeing, these are starting to escalate. The challenge is essentially that organizations are not spending enough on cybersecurity and these kind of things. And these kind of attacks are not essentially attacks which can be perpetrated in a day. They essentially are over a period of time where the attacker is embedding himself into the particular system as a what we call as advanced persistent threats. So I think it's important for organization to primarily look at those particular elements. And as I said, on one side is IT systems, and what really affected was essentially just the passengers. But if the entire aircraft had been taken in control, then essentially the X number of passengers that were on the flight essentially would have been stranded up there, and the organization would have had no choice but to actually pay the ransom of whatever was being asked, whether it was bitcoins, cash transfer, whatever it is. So I think when you really start comparing this to Air India and start comparing it to some of the other attacks, I think these are only starting to accelerate. The threat surface itself is starting to increase significantly. The attackers are becoming extremely organized. So this is a call to everybody to say this attack or this particular kind of risk is true and real in the real world. Up to now, it was affecting IT systems, but it can affect manufacturing, it can affect our government, it can affect our aircraft, so it can possibly affect everything. And it sort of will essentially bring the an entire city down or entire aircraft down from that aspect.
Right. Well, absolutely. We've seen that happening. We've got a glimpse of it this morning, how almost all the flights of Spicejet this morning had to be cancelled, were delayed because of this particular ransomware attack attempt. Now, Sandeep Sen Gupta, in your opinion, what's behind the rise in cases? Is it also because of increase in use of cryptocurrency all over the world? More of its adoption is what we are seeing happening around the world, and that's the reason why these kind of attacks have gone up? Or do you think probably with people now working from home and there's this hybrid model that's also active in countries like India, of course globally too, it's the same phenomena, that is making companies more and more vulnerable?
So see, the point is, there was a day when if you want to hijack an airlines, you have to be a passenger. So those were the old technique. Nowadays, most of the crimes are shifting to digital crime. So even hijacking, and you don't need to be a passenger within the flight. You can be somebody who is sitting within your home and hijacking a flight just by taking control of the flight. Most of the technology that we are advancing, the focus is on efficiency, on productivity. Security is always a backbencher. And as we are moving our technology to upgrading our technology, the security part is getting more and more neglected. And that is what Sri has mentioned, that as we go through the days, we will see that a lot of these are starting to happen. And in case this is just maybe a case of somebody's carelessness, because ransomware mostly happen because if you have clicked on some attachment either, or I believe in 80% of the cases when we have gone to clients, ransomware happened when one vendor has been given a remote access to one of their servers. So this is the biggest reason why ransomware attack happened. A vendor has been given a direct remote desktop to a server. I don't know what is the reason behind this Spicejet attack, but this is maybe a stray attack from somebody's carelessness. However, as we will see down the line after 6 months to 1 year, there will be targeted attack, and that will not be from a criminal. It can be a state-sponsored terrorist. Suppose if you want to hijack, suppose we have seen that long time back, some criminals, some terrorists have hijacked a flight by diverting it to some other country. These type of things will increase over the days. And what you are seeing over there, this Spicejet case, this is only an example. So if we do not take this security as a compliance, most of the time we are seeing that people just take security as a compliance and take security more seriously, we will see this type of cases. Now, you have asked that whether cryptocurrency has increased this type of attack. That is actually, you are correct, because in cryptocurrency, you can actually hide the identity of the person. You can actually take some money from the victim without, revealing the identity who is accepting the money. So it has become easier to do this type of crimes. But when in the coming days, you will see that people are doing not because of money, but there can be terrorist organization who will be working on this. There will be state-sponsored terrorism. There will be organized crime racket who will do this
Right.
to this
There is,
business.
in fact, I would like to add to what Sandeep has said, that there have been, services provided like ransomware as a service. Now that's pretty, I would say, important aspect to be looked into, because from the legal side of it, law enforcement point of view, how do you track who has done this crime? And if it is cross-border, then all the more a reason. There's no Cybercrime Convention India as a signatory to. It opens up
And
Pandora's
if it is
box of
done via,
data
say, a VPN network, then it will become even difficult to track the person who's behind it.
What happens to the data of consumers? What if that has been compromised? There are a lot of questions which come with such incidents, and a lot of
Yes,
investigation
and we know
required.
what happened with Air India in May 2021, when it announced actually that its customer database had suffered a massive security breach, and approximately 4.5 million records may have been leaked in this massive security breach. So we already have an example in the aviation sector only of an attack of this kind. Now in 2022, we are talking about ransomware attack attempt on Spicejet. Important points you've raised. But Sanat Kaul, I want to now ask you, as some of our guests have in a way suggested, that this is like, an attempt to hijack the system of a particular airline. Tomorrow, it can also mean hijacking a plane if somebody wants to. Is it a cause of big concern for you? And do you think, are we doing enough to deal with this particular issue? Do we have enough checks and balances in place to fight this?
Yeah. So to answer your question, it is a very big issue. And second, we are not doing enough. Even International Civil Aviation Organization is working on this. They want to have a cyber crime framework. What happens is that ransomware is only when they try and get hold of some data and they want to bargain for some money. But I'm talking about, even as somebody had mentioned, hijacking can be done. The entire air navigation system, which is internationally connected, can have a serious issue with cybercrime. So it is a more dangerous thing than, say, banking cybercrime or petroleum pipeline, this thing, because here people are traveling by air in millions all the time. And there is a likelihood that somebody can attack the air traffic control, somebody can attack the aircraft pilots, the GPS system. So cybercrime is a very dangerous thing as far as civil aviation is concerned. And I am sure, but I would insist that Government of India, Ministry of Civil Aviation should have a proper cell. They should do a proper analysis of what is the firewall that exists for us, how much security do we have. And as somebody said, if there are non-state actors trying to attack, not for money, but for other purposes, it is very important that we should do it. In fact, I would go and say that when 9/11 of 2001 took place, the entire security system of the world, that was when the World Trade Tower were attacked by civil aircraft, the whole security system of the aviation sector in the entire world was revamped. I think we should not wait for an incident of cyber crime or a cyber attack to happen in civil aviation. We should go ahead and start working on how to make sure that this does not happen. It happened in Spicejet or in Air India. It did not lead to any accident or any dangerous security or safety threat. But it could happen next time when an aircraft is actually traveling and its GPS systems and other things are getting diverted. It is not able to receive the signals properly, and there is cyber hacking going on. In fact, I think it is time for India to have in civil
Right.
aviation sector hackathons to see whether what is the quality of our security system existing between airlines and between the Airport Authority of India, which is the air traffic control provider, which provides the navigation system.
Hmm.
We have not had any hackathon to the best of my knowledge.
Okay, interesting point you've raised.
I wanted to say
Yes,
that this is
interesting
almost
point
like
you
a
have
cyber
raised. Dr. Karnika
terrorist
Seth
attack.
also I think wants to come in.
Yes, I wanted to say that this is also actually amounting to cyber terrorism in terms of our IT Act. If you look at Section 66F in particular, it has a imprisonment of almost life imprisonment, up to life imprisonment for such attacks which cause public havoc in critical information infrastructures of India. So protected systems or public utility systems being attacked, and if it's threat to life of passengers, there's nothing more important at this point to highlight this aspect as well, that our current laws do provide for such punishments. The challenge now is how to investigate and how to get the
But Sri
enforcement.
Parthasarthi, then the question is, how do we identify who was behind it? Could we
One of the
figure
things
out
that
who was behind the cyber attack on Mumbai's power grids in October 2020, when public services like railways came to a halt, and many such attacks that have happened in the past? Do we ever find out who these people really were?
One of the things that is important is while this is an awakening call and essentially today SpiceJet is affected, I think I agree with Mr. Kaul that essentially this can affect any airline. It can affect the medical industry in terms of attack on pacemakers or critical medical equipment and those kind of things. So what really happens in this kind of a situation is I think there has to be a sectoral connection by all of the people in that particular sector where they work together to essentially plug the gaps. Second is essentially what an organization will do immediately right after this kind of an incident is they will essentially perform a complete forensic analysis, and they will perform what you call as a deep dive cyber review of all of their particular systems, both in internal, external, third party, extended enterprise. They will basically look at all of that, and that is where essentially they will look at the gaps that are there in that particular system, and they will essentially need to then work towards remediating that. And once they do that, I think if they can also share those same findings to rest of the people in the sector, then I think the other sectoral people will also benefit. In India, I think that's one of the big challenge, because if you take the US, there's something called FISMA, where organizations essentially come together and they basically share, they work with the regulator, they provide information, and then essentially all of that essentially then transmitted back in terms of what could be some of those particular bigger challenges. Because the cyber attackers today are very organized and very structured,
Right.
but the people who are attacked are not really structured. So from that aspect, I think a couple of things. One is regulation. Second is essentially deep awareness and training within the organization, because the biggest challenge is essentially the weakest link is the people. Third is essentially deep reviews, which have to be on a regular basis, which essentially have to be done by the organization. Fourth is essentially sharing within this particular sector so that essentially you're not standing alone.
I think it's important to highlight also that the IT Ministry
Okay.
has come up with some important rules, regarding such cyber incidents which affect critical infrastructures. On 28th of April, this new directions have come into being, and within 6 hours of any attack like this, it has to be reported to the certain. I wonder there are a lot of compliances to be done in cases of such attacks, and those have to be also plugged apart from policy changes which may be required, in this case.
Okay. Mr. Jitendra Bhargav, now, one of the issues that has been raised in the debate so far has been that in some way, maybe, we are neglecting security aspect as far as the aviation sector is concerned. You understand how an airline functions. On an issue like this, how serious are the airlines today?
let's not be airline specific. The reality is our work culture in the country has been such that unless we have woken up, we do not take decisions that could have been taken earlier as a preventive measure. So today's thing should be taken as a wake-up call, and some panelists very rightly said, if it is Spicejet today, it can be any other airline tomorrow or any other sector another day. So the reality is, take it as a wake-up call. The airline industry cannot do without digitalization. It will always be computer oriented. So countermeasures will have to be taken. Now, whether it's the Civil Aviation Ministry, the IT Ministry, or the Home Ministry getting together, because as another panel very rightly said, this is cyber terrorism. Now, when you look at it from that perspective, the stakes are much higher. And I would like to compliment you, Veena, for taking up this program with getting these cyber experts to aid you. I'm sure the passengers at the airport, after hearing or watching this program, will be more appreciative that what happened at the airport or what kind of agony they went through at the airport was not something of Spicejet's own doing. They were attacked, and it isn't easy when your entire computer system is hijacked and you have no access to computerization. You cannot revert to the manual system at the airport and ensure the flights will take on time, or it will be as usual at the airport as on any other day. The depth or the kind of thing that we've gone through, the Spicejet has gone through, perhaps calls for a case study. People need to understand. Civil aviation industry needs to wake up. Mr. Sanat Kaul was very right in saying that we haven't done adequately. Now, when you introduce a system, the ransomware attacks are there worldwide kind of a thing. Say, have we done enough? Have we taken countermeasures or not? Because passenger inconvenience is a small thing. The harm that it is causing to the airline and to the aviation industry is phenomenal. We got to be waking up, taking it up seriously. The government should say, okay, this is one we would, and to the extent that we can prevent henceforth, we shall do it. And nobody can raise an accusing finger that the government hasn't done enough. We shouldn't be saying this 3 months from now.
One of the things that I'd like to add is
You're right,
essentially-
and this definitely should serve as a wake-up call. Yes, Sri Parthasarathi wants to come in.
One of the things that I'd like to say is, while essentially it's an awakening call, I think having worked in the sector and having worked with a lot of the airlines, I would like to say this is an incident these are some of the incidents that have happened very recently. But really, I think people also have to look at what you call as how stable our particular airlines and infrastructure have been, both from an airport and governance and all of that perspective. So I think it should not lead to fear psychosis that people should not be traveling and other thing, because I would like to personally say that I will be traveling tomorrow by flight from Delhi to Bangalore. So it is not that essentially people should avoid airlines, but it's just more of an awakening call that all government, regulators, all sectors have to basically awaken, and this is a real threat and they have to really work on it. But at the same time, it should not be that essentially people are just avoiding flying and other thing. It's not that kind of fear that we should basically be causing.
You're right. And of course, there are two issues here that we are highlighting for our viewers. One is about these kind of ransomware attacks. What is behind the rise in such attacks, and can something be done to prevent them? And second aspect is also the fact the way passengers had to suffer. And before I go across to Sandeep Sen Gupta on the issue of ransomware attack once again, I want to go across to Mr. Sanat Kaul once, on the way the airline handled the situation. I mean, there have been passengers out there who've been writing on social media that they were inside an aircraft for 3 hours and 45 minutes. Is it fair? Can't we have better systems in place so that, even customers do not suffer, while passengers will understand tomorrow when they wake up and read the newspapers that it was something that Spicejet didn't do it deliberately. But then what Spicejet could have done was maybe a better passenger experience. Even that was missing.
Yeah, okay. So that part, I think nobody can say much about it, excepting that the Spicejet should have done much more to help the passengers who were suffering. But what I would like to say is that safety is a subject of the Director General Civil Aviation. Security is of Bureau of Civil Aviation, BCAS. But where passenger comfort and passenger facilitation is concerned, Actually, there is nobody. It is DGCA, but DGCA is preoccupied with safety issues and licensing issues and a whole lot of other issues. And I've been advocating that there should be an ombudsman for civil aviation passengers. That is very much required because the growth in passenger traffic is so much,
But
and
would something
there are
like this,
obviously going
Mr.
to be
Sanat
problems.
Kaul, not come under BCAS?
No, they look into security. This is not a security issue where passengers were made to wait 4 hours without any tea or coffee or anything. It's hardly a security issue. It's just a
No,
bad
I
management by an airline.
ransomware attack
wanted
specifically
to,
I'm talking about. Wouldn't
Oh, yes.
that aspect come under BCAS?
I think
Absolutely, it should come under BCAS. It is a security issue. It's a very major security issue. So we don't know what BCAS has done in this respect. I mean, they are still probably, in my mind, their mindset is all about physical security and what CISF was introduced about 20 years back, and they've done a good job. But they do a physical security. They are not aware of computers, IT, and basically the threat through cybercrime. So I don't know whether BCAS is equipped enough to look into the cyber security angle. I don't think so. I hope I'm wrong, but that's how whatever little I know about the Bureau, they are still in the old system of having to ensure a physical security of the aircraft. And that's where they start and end. Cyber
Okay.
security is an unknown thing.
That's a
with-
very important point you have raised. Mr. Jitendra Bhargav, would you like to add to it? Yes. 1 second.
You know,
One second. Yes.
The one
Mr. Jitendra
point
Bhargav
is-
first and then Dr. Karnika Seth.
sure.
I would like to reiterate the point made by another panelist that let there be no fear psychosis. That passengers must have the requisite confidence in the airline and in the Civil Aviation Ministry that they're doing their utmost to ensure safety of aircraft. On the other part of passenger inconvenience, as I said earlier, once the gravity of what has happened today is realized by the passengers who have been on the Twitter, they would really understand that what the airline is going through. Having worked for an airline for 2 decades, let me put this one fact very clear. You see, people being on board, passengers being on board for 3 hours plus on an aircraft. Look at from the airline perspective at the airport. You are already saddled with about 800 to 1,000 passengers on ground who have not got onto the aircraft. You ask these passengers to deplane also. You don't have the requisite staff on to handle these passengers. So there is, one has to
But
appreciate
Mr.
the
Jitendra
constraints
Bhargav,
under which.
For a 6 a.m. flight, Mr. Jitendra Bhargav, somebody has to wake up around 3 or 4 a.m. depending upon how far you live from the airport. And just imagine the, plight of that particular passenger. He would have reached the airport, say, if you're talking about the national capital, must have reached the airport at least around 4:40 or 4:50 maximum if that person has to catch a flight at 6 a.m. And just imagine, being told by the airline that you board the aircraft and you are made to sit inside the aircraft for 3 hours and 40 minutes without any sort of refreshment, without any sort of proper communication. How will be the plight of those passengers? That's what I want you to address.
No, I'm not denying the inconvenience caused. The question is, was it avoidable or unavoidable, and to what extent was it unavoidable? Let's put it this way in very clear words. As I said earlier, airport is not something where you can get excess staff just by the heck of it and said, okay, I need 200 more people to manage these number of passengers who are at the airport wanting it. Then you take an optimistic view. Did the captain of the aircraft or the ground staff handling that particular flight know how long would it take? Was the dimensions of the gravity of ransomware known immediately? The answer is no. Let's be practical. I am all for this thing that, look, passengers' inconvenience should have been avoided to the extent it can. Having worked in an airline, I know the constraints under which we work. So one can immediately jump to a conclusion, as I said earlier, with no kind of intentions. I said, you've done a commendable job by doing this program. People would have got enlightened on what the ransomware, what are the risks involved, how it has impacted an airline, how it was not something of Spicejet's own doing, and the inconvenience. 80% of the passengers would be greatly appreciative of what they have instead of criticizing what they went through at the airport today. We got to look at it, take the airline perspective also. Yes, I would agree with you. Tea, coffee, snacks should have been offered. And if they were not offered, I do not know why they were not offered. But normally, airline and DGCA regulations are very clear that if a flight is delayed by a certain number of hours, please serve refreshments. Whether they did or not, I don't think we are privy to it at the moment.
DGCA SOP, DGCA CAR on what should be done if a flight is delayed for a certain number of hours. Dr. Karnika said, on the basis of what we've heard so far in the debate, do you think there is a need to have some sort of an SOP? Maybe this one coming from BCAS, wherein if something like this happens, then what should the airlines be doing? Is that something that the aviation sector needs right now?
Absolutely, I agree on that. In fact, our general law, Consumer Protection Act, also protects consumers against any kind of deficiency in services or any kind of unfair trade practices. So in such a scenario where the mitigation measures have been taken by the airline, whether there was any deficiency in services, what were the terms and conditions agreed by a consumer in this case, those have to be examined. Whether there was any case of negligence in monitoring the reasonable security practices by the data protection or the compliance officers in the IT infrastructure systems, was it there or not? Because under Section 85 of our IT Act, there's deemed liability of directors. So if there has been any kind of negligence, then certainly they're answerable and accountable for that. There's compensation payable for that. And that these issues need to be examined in light of the peculiar facts of this particular case. It cannot be a generalized statement. However, these issues are pertinent to examine this aspect, and particularly in terms of rights of consumers. It is important to see whether there was deficiency in services. And from what I understand, there were no refreshments served as per the facts and what is being shared. So were there any other mitigation measures? For example, there could be certain passengers who were claustrophobic, or they were not able to get fresh air for some time. There could be health issues. There could be other issues involved. So whether those,
People
SOPs
had
really
connecting flights as well.
Absolutely, there was a lot of damage in terms of money as well, maybe a lot of loss in terms of that, as well as inconvenience costs. So should the passengers not be compensated for these aspects and these sufferings? So this is something that needs to be examined in light of the peculiar facts of this case.
Hina, I'd like to add to what Dr.
Sandeep Sen Gupta, now
Hina, I'd like to add
one second, Shri Parthasarathy, just give me a moment.
Yeah.
Okay, very quickly, finish your point. Yes, then Sandeep Sen Gupta.
I think the key thing is what she said was essentially perfect. And I think the one thing that needs to be done is essentially you have to dissect this particular issue. There was an issue, which was a ransomware attack. There was a post aspect, and then there's aspect related to after effect, right? So I think what really needs to happen is that when the standard SOP fail, then essentially the crisis management processes and other things actually have to take into control that particular situation. There has to be what you call unified command, governance, and control of the entire incident and management. And then essentially everybody needs to be following the crisis management principles, crisis management program, and whatever has been said to say, if this particular incident happened, what would you do? What are the next steps that you do? And that is exactly what really failed. All the things related to customer grievances, all the things related to customer happiness, all of that will come post when somebody performs an analysis. But during that particular incident, it is essentially crisis management and crisis and resilience that really need to come into picture, which an organization really needs to put into in terms of a very formal program.
Okay, Sandeep Sen Gupta, you made a very interesting point that this actually could have been some sort of a stray attack also. Someone might have maybe clicked something. So in your opinion, what kind of solutions can be there to prevent something like this in the aviation sector?
See, first of all, I would like to have given advice to Spicejet. Like, most of the time, ransomware attack works on a broadcasting mode. That means the attacker doesn't know whom they are attacking. So if Spicejet somehow got victimized, they should have posed as a normal, ordinary person and given a $90 ransomware, and they would have easily come out of it. But if these guys knew that there is as big as Spicejet and airlines, definitely the ransomware attack, whatever they are asking, the money that will go up. Now, coming to how this can be stopped. See, we are ethical hackers. There are hundreds of companies who has already realized that if you want to run a critical infrastructure, you need to have ethical hackers in your team. Most of the companies nowadays work where they have IT guys in their team, but they don't have proper security guys working in their team. So you need to have people who are good in threat hunting. This is a technology, a term that most of the technical guys know, but companies are still not adopting it. More importantly, you need to make people aware, right from the highest person to the junior most person.
Right.
But we have seen that awareness is missing. So people think that they can only need to give awareness to the IT guys, but that awareness should be relevant to the job, and it should be followed by something called social engineering audit or phishing simulation. This doesn't happen in the company.
Yes.
And the most threatening part, now we
Yes,
are
I
talking.
think the bottom line is that first, awareness is needed. Second, better communication is needed. And third, probably some sort of an SOP is needed if something like this happen. And we all need to acknowledge the fact that cyber attacks are indeed taking place, and we now need to strengthen our infrastructure, strengthen our systems so that they do not happen. They are set to rise. That's what the experts are saying. But of course, we need to strengthen the infrastructure that we have. I have 3 viewers joining us as well. Anil Sood from the National Cabinet. Let's quickly listen into what they are also saying. Anil Sood, good evening. Go ahead. Mr. Anil Sood, can you hear me?
I can hear you. This is a clarion call. Can you hear me? Hello, can
Yes,
you hear
go
me?
ahead.
This is a clarion call, and we need to pull up our socks as a nation, because simply we are not training the people on the job. We lack infrastructure, and so far as customer care is concerned, it is pathetic. We talk of law, there are plenty of laws in the country. There are plenty of SOPs, but how to get the law implemented?
Yes.
Then again, question is
Implementation is the key, and it's a clarion call. You're absolutely right. Mr. Anil Sood, thank you for calling us here on Mirror Now this evening. We have Srinivasan joining us from Belgaum as well. Thank you for calling us here on Urban Debate. Go ahead.
Yeah, good evening. My name is Srinivasan, and actually I am not a computer expert, but yes, I have 2 computers at home, and I have found with original softwares. Now, I have found out 2 things. The problem per se does not exist only for the airlines. Now, it is across the nation, across government departments, across private sectors. And what I have seen is, because I have an antivirus Norton which is installed and original softwares, there are many government departments which do, when we click on that, it says this site is not safe. Why it does not support something called SSL? I am not aware of that. Now, those kind of things, why it is like that? HTTPS is not there. Now, I just did a small survey and I asked my friends. They told that because these companies and these government departments are cost cutting and they are going to some roadside vendors who have 2-3 small computers which they are using as servers. And the third thing is this compromises millions of users and data from the government departments. The third thing is that everyone from top to bottom have to know that the password and the username should be strictly kept in very, very confidential mode. That is the basic thing which somebody should do.
Srinivasan, appreciate you calling us here on Urban Debate on Mirror Now. Yes, I'm completely out of time, but thank you very much for calling us. You can, of course, send us what you wanted to say on our social media handle as well. But thank you very much for joining us. Thank you very much, all of you, for being a part of this debate. We have to slip into a very, very short break right now. On the other side, we'll discuss state of the economy with top economist Arvind Panagria.